Come, all you moonshiners, if you want to hear about the kind of booze that they sell around here. Made a way back in top of them hills where they
I'm a cancer and I like it.
Invaluable, in fact. And it's giving us...
He came back for more. It won't take him long. Oh, real quick now, there was one other design challenge that that kind of presented itself early on, but we just had to work our way through it. And that was the design of the Parrot. And you'll notice that the Parrot comes straight down from the condenser, makes 2 turns and goes straight up. Now, the challenge with this design, which is easy to overcome, but the challenge with this design is it makes it almost a partially closed system because there's no venting whatsoever. So that means that the liquid that fills all the way up to here because it has to equal on the opposite side. So you've got this all full of distillate, and this becomes a lock within itself, that it has to displace that and overcome that from the condenser in order to pour out the tube. So the only thing that they're going to have to do at some point is either change the design of the Parrot itself or just add a vent here so it vents to the atmosphere, and that way it is no longer a partially closed system.
So we're talking about our water chiller.
This is our water supply. Yeah, go ahead.
So the original intent actually was not to do this whole setup right here. The original intent was this right here is a bar sink. And what it's designed to do is that you put ice in it, and there's a bunch of tubes that run through an aluminum block on the bottom, and those tubes cool off all the soda lines before they go to the fountain. So what you could, in theory, do is reverse that, and you put a cold or a condensing system. Not condensing. What am I looking for? What's the word? Yeah, evaporator. Thank you. On the other side of this, like glycol, or whether it be something like R410A, and it cools the aluminum block, which would then chill the water that's on the inside, which then powers the pumps and cools everything down. That we ran into some technical challenges, so we went with this right here as a temporary solution, which works really, really well. We ended up originally having just one tube come down here, but only kind of fell right through the center of this, and it didn't cool the water off. So by now distributing the water throughout the entire condensing coil, it chills it as it goes down, and we maintain roughly throughout the entire process. Right now we're at 62, been running for what, about 2.5, 3 hours? We're at 62 degrees. It started off at 57, so there's only been a 5-degree variation between start and now in about 2.5, 3 hours.
The other thing I'm going to say is that originally when we did have just the hose going onto this, we ran still a lot hotter than we do now, due to inexperience. And that did indeed heat up quite a bit. I do wonder though that at this stage, running it properly and appropriately the way it's supposed to, I don't think the water would get as hot.
Yeah, probably not. I don't know if I would necessarily chop it up to inexperience. It was also the fact that our PID controller was in the kettle. It wasn't at the top.
Right.
So we were running it hot because we had no data point.
There are various reasons why we did, but run it hot we did, and I mean, we made alcohol with it, but it wasn't.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to note, and this is to anybody that gets a new still. It doesn't matter who makes it. If it's handmade, if it's factory made, it's whatever. Go through your still with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, actually check it. Look into everything that you possibly can, because there are things that happen where solder, like in our instance, to block up the condensing coil. And so this thing got really hot, and we actually had back pressure and everything else like that, where we shouldn't have not had back pressure. And it was because I didn't do enough of a thorough enough job inspecting the still prior to just plugging it in and going. So knowing your equipment is going to be really, really, really important. I also think at the same time that, there are no advantages to going to a copper still. There's none. I can't think of one. There is, for me, beyond the fact that if we were creating a storefront environment where we wanted to showcase this off as a thing that was functioning, that makes sense. But from an actual production or a taste standpoint or anything else, there's no benefit to it. We can replicate, if you want to be hard-lined of this is how it used to be done, we can replicate that same copper process with copper packing in the column, to pull out the sulfates and sulfites that don't actually exist in distillation. But from the maintenance perspective of a copper still, it's absolutely horrible. Now, what I will say about our still manufacturer, the one that made this, and I'm not going to say him by name, he makes an amazing still. I mean, it's beautiful. It produces, it pumps out, it's elegant, it's gorgeous, it functions. It does exactly what he said it was going to do. Elegantly. I mean, it's perfect. But from a production standpoint or a maintenance standpoint, or doing this even as a home hobbyist or as a commercial guy, there's a lot of work that once this camera goes off and everybody's like all happy, hey, George, I love your video, I subscribed. There's like 2 hours of cleaning this damn thing. And it's a pain in the ass. It's a royal pain in the ass. And you can save, I'm gonna spend 73 cents on making 7 gallons of 551. I don't care. You still gotta make 551. You still gotta go to the grocery store. You still gotta do this. There's a bunch of crap that goes into just maintaining a copper still. It's not worth it. It's not. And so the next still is without a doubt gonna be stainless steel. Whether we use copper packing or river rocks or what, who knows, we'll figure that out later. But the base design of the still is definitely going to be stainless, just from a work and time management perspective.
I will say that the still is very pretty, gorgeous to look at, kind of like a musical instrument. But absolutely, I think a stainless steel still is going to be so much more user-friendly.
Yeah.
Not maintenance free, but there's going to be a lot less maintenance that needs to be done with that. And yes, I mean this is nice. We're learning a lot. We're learning a lot, and that is one of the things that we learned. That a copper still, which we bought, owing to the myth that it's going to, like you said, pull out the sulfides, all this.
Blaming you, Discovery Channel.
But it's yeah, it's a pain. It's a pain to clean, pain to maintain, fun to play around with, but overall, go with stainless steel.
Yeah, stainless.
Good point. Good tip. Another part of that learning curve was the cleaning, it was through practice and demonstration. We made the 551 cleaning solution. And the reason we call it 551 because it's easy to remember the formula at that point, because it's 500 milliliters of water, H2O. It's 50 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. And you can get that at Walmart. You can get them in a 12-ounce bottle, they're like 78 cents. And then it was 1 weight ounces of citric acid. Okay? And the citric acid drops the pH to an astronomically low level. This is the hydrogen peroxide is the catalyst, and water is just the carrier. Okay? And this stuff, once you drop your copper in and soak it, my gosh, copper mesh, you put it into a jar and just put a lid on it, just set it in the corner and leave it there for about 20 minutes. And that clear liquid will turn a greenish blue, and when you pull the copper out, it looks like it's brand new. So we mixed up a lot of this because we had to clean the still, we had to clean the column, we had to clean the condenser. And now just so you'll know, this is a tip, and I don't want to go crazy over this, but a lot of times we get emails in about blue distillate. And a lot of times, almost in every case, a blue distillate is a result of a dirty condenser. Because a lot of times you can't get inside this condenser to clean that copper effectively. And so it'll start to build up the tarnish, and it'll start to corrode. And then when your distillate goes through there, it'll start to pick it up, and it'll come out and it'll look blue on the other end. And if that's the case, then you've probably got a dirty condenser. Take some 551 mixture and soak it. Close off one end, fill it up, just let it sit there, and then clean it out with some nice clear water, and that'll clean out all of that dirty buildup that you've got built up and coming out in your spirit.
So are we supposed to be honest?
Uh-huh.
We're supposed to tell the community, like...
Oh, yeah, we tell them, yeah.
Tell them how it is.
There are no secrets here.
This sucks. No.
Don't
It's
go.
a lot of work, man. I think I blew up
Oh,
my shoulder.
yeah, it is a lot of work. You know, you were talking interesting about last night. We are on. You were talking interesting last night about the things you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, I got it all figured out, and I need this, I need this, I need that. But then until you start to actually operate, you're like, damn it, I needed a 6-foot extension cord
Yeah.
to go here, and now I need an additional hose.
Yeah, there isn't.
That is-
There's not enough videos in the world you can watch. Because
No,
it's all
no.
about your space and where you're at, and like tripping over yourself. And okay, well, this didn't work over here. Let's relocate this
No,
here. Let's
nothing beats the practical
Power.
experience.
Running
Yeah.
the cooling thing, running the dehumidifier, and running something else. We didn't know we were gonna blow breakers. Start popping breakers, and it's like, oh, god damn it.
Yes,
Yeah.
we did. Yep.
You don't know what you don't know.
You got to adapt to your environment. Yeah, your environment
Yep.
has a lot to do with it. But what we did last night, now, okay, we got the still run, and we've got that in pieces right now, and you can see that back here. Yeah, there you can see that. We got that in pieces because we had to do a really good clean on it. That'll be a story for another video.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's pretty odd, you know, when you ask somebody, you say, wow, yeah, we got to take this apart and clean that. And the response is, I got to clean that? It kind of makes you wonder. But we got that all taken care of. Kevin, you're a wonderful guy, man. But, yeah, you do.
Hey, George,
Yeah,
thanks
just
for
a dirty
letting
one.
people know about that. Yeah, thank you.
People need to know. Yeah, that's the dirty one. It's part of the self-disclosure, you know, just tell
Yeah.
everything. And we did
Go stainless steel. Stainless steel.
Yes, make no mistake. Stainless
Oh,
steel.
we did a huge batch of a corn-based mash last night, and the intent is to make what?
Saddleman'S cut.
Saddleman'S cut. Yeah, because we started off this morning with a little bit of Saddleman'S cut, of course, to get ourselves going.
Yep. This
yep.
one right here.
There we go, and we're gonna make a lot of it. So yeah, stick around. You'll get the recipe for that. But this is what we've got in here. We're getting ready to transfer from our mash kettle into a fast ferment.
And he's only really recording just for when this thing blows up and goes all over the place.
Yeah,
Because
this ought to
we-
be interesting. I have a prediction.
We
We'll
are
just wait to
expecting
see what
things to happen.
happens. So stick with us.
All right.
All right.
All right, who's going to ignite this thing? You
All right.
ready? And George, you ready?
Oh, I'm ready. Call it buffoonery. Yeah, whatever you want, but of course, yeah, just a bunch of guys having fun. We failed to actually record some of the really key moments in developing that Saddleman'S cut. So I'm gonna go over the recipe and do a real quick pictorial. So to kind of, again, for the sake of transparency and so that we all understand what was actually going on, we ran into some challenges, and I'll explain those as we go through. Now, what we had was a big, I believe it was almost a 25-gallon pot, 20 or 25-gallon pot. And the way this thing was designed was it's got a false bottom in it that sits about 3 inches off the bottom of the actual kettle itself. And this false bottom has a perforated plate that goes all the way around. We used a banjo cooker. Oh, these things are great. If you just type this in to your Google search bar, a whole bunch of them come up. And these things are rated for the different sizes that you're using. Now, the one we used was a little bit smaller than optimal, but it worked for our purpose. It was probably 110,000 BTU. But the way these things are designed is they have the cooking head on it itself looks like this in some models. And they got all these holes where all the flame comes out. And they're really, really good because they dissipate the heat evenly based on the size of the banjo style cooker itself. You know, so you can get an 8-inch, you get a 10-inch, you get a 20-inch. And of course, the more you can spread that heat out evenly, the more evenly your heating process goes. Otherwise, you start to have really hot spots in the center. This standoff really allowed us to place the grains in, and the grains never touched, supposedly, never touched the bottom of the pot. So here's what we used. For this one, we used 15 gallons of water. All right, 15 gallons of water. We used 20 pounds of corn. Now, this corn was fresh corn. It was an organic variety of a Class A corn. That what we actually did was we grind it. We had to grind it up, and you grind it up to about a 3/16 of an inch flakes. Or flake corn will work just as well. But make sure that you're using a quality product in order to get a quality distillate. So we used 20 pounds of flake corn, and we only had to use 5 pounds of 2-row barley. Now, if you do the math in your head real quick, you'll notice that we've got just a little bit over a pound per gallon. And as I always say, more water is always better. More water is always better. And you'll find that if you do that, now you can cut this down yourself by, divide everything by 3. And that's kind of what you're going to need if you're going to make a 5-gallon batch. That's not the whole recipe. The rest of it's coming. So we put all this inside a brew bag and place the brew bag in here. The first challenge that we had to overcome, and the reason we used a brew bag was because the perforated holes around there were just large enough for corn to slide through if in fact it was in the water itself, which actually happened. The top of the bag opened up, we had a mistake, and a whole bunch of it just kind of filtered out. And it did wind up ending up down in here, which gave us some challenges because the port used on the side to pump it out of, a lot of that starch got coagulated and stopped up the pump, stopped up the line. We wound up siphoning off of the top, which took us quite a while, but we wound up siphoning off the top. So we heated this up using the banjo cooker that was sitting here. We heated that up to anywhere between 180 and 190 degrees, and the challenge with that is because the absolute mass of what we were working with, and we cooked that, and I'm just, for the sake of argument, I'll put it at 190 degrees, because that's what we were shooting for, about 190 degrees. We wanted to keep it there, and we wanted to keep it there for a period of time that would allow all of that corn to actually hydrolyze and start to, for lack of better words, I guess, it's just kind of explode all of those starch molecules and cause them to gelatinize. And we left it there for about an hour. And what we wound up with was this huge batch of porridge. And when you start to whittle through it and you're using your ladle or your spoon or whatever it is, you'll notice that it's really, really thick. It's kind of reminiscent of a really thick oatmeal or grits, if you can kind of envision that. After that, we shut the heat off, and then we allowed this to cool, and that took quite a while because of the mass, and we had no other cooling mechanism to cool this down. Now, why did we cool it down? We had to cool it down before we introduced the 2-row barley, because at that temperature, if you introduced your 2-row barley at 190 degrees, you inoculate the amylase that's in that 2-row barley, which makes it non-usable whatsoever, because we're using that in order to convert these starches into fermentable sugars. Now, we did a starch test, which you'll find after it took almost probably 8 or 9 hours for this to actually cool down itself. And then once it cooled down, and we allowed that to cool down to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the reason we stopped at the reason we went to 160 degrees Fahrenheit was because, remember, anything else that you add into that, you're going to soak up some thermal energy. So we knew that we weren't going to lose more than about 5 degrees, which would have brought us to our optimal 155 degrees Fahrenheit. You all know this one. You know it because you know that at 155 degrees, your amylase converts your starches to fermentable sugars. Yes. So above 165, you inoculate them. Below 148, they become non-responsive. So we're at 155, which is what we call the sweet spot. So we introduced all of that 2-row barley, and then we put the cover on and we allowed that to set. And we let it set for 60 to 90 minutes. Now, the purpose of this is to allow that, and of course you stir it in, and what this does is it allows that amylase to work its way through all of those starches and then start to cut those chains and convert those to fermentable sugars. in the very end, what you wind up with is you wind up with this great big pot of what you would think is like a really, really thin soup. You can tell immediately, once you open that pot up, you can tell almost immediately, because all you'll see is a liquid, and most of the grain has just kind of settled to the bottom, and it's no longer a really, really thick porridge. All right? So that was our first challenge, was to get that to happen, which happens all by itself. You don't have to do anything to it. Just leave it sit. Leave it alone. No need to go back and stir it several times. Just leave it alone. Yeah, I can't say that often enough. Now, we checked the pH, and at the very beginning, our pH, we adjusted it to 5.2. And the reason that we adjusted to 5.2 at the very beginning, believe it, it's a personal choice, okay? I like to start off with a water that's at 5.2, and then I'll know where to go from there. Your grain and everything that you do to it is going to adjust it and change that. The critical point, the critical point of pH is right before you add your yeast. Okay, and please, once you adjust the pH and add the yeast, leave it alone. Allow your pH to fluctuate. You can track it if you want to, but there's no purpose in tracking the pH after you've pitched the yeast. Nor is it recommended for you to try to adjust the pH after you've pitched the yeast. Leave it alone. That's a real misconception and a confusion, and probably based on the way I have presented this in the past. But once you get your pH to 5.2 and pitch yeast, okay, after yeast, leave pH alone. Okay. So now we're sitting here and we allowed that to cool, and of course I know we got all the liquid and everything, and so we tried to, and this is where we wound up with the first challenge, which was the coagulated starches that had clumped together and stopped up the pumps up. That challenge presented itself very early on, and that was because some of the stuff just kind of worked its way out of the bag. You can either use a brew bag or another idea, because we did a follow-on and we just put a piece of stainless steel window screen, which actually made those holes a whole lot smaller and nothing falls through that. It is a technique, but you need to find a method for, if you're going to use a pump to try to pump that off, to keep those grains from mixing into that liquid bath that's in the very bottom. So that was the end of this process, okay, or this step of the process. And now it's a little labor intensive, and I know that, but all of your mashes are a little bit labor intensive. And then again, remember, we're using 20 pounds of corn and 15 gallons of water. So now, just for a quick review, remember, we used 15 gallons of water, 20 pounds of corn, 5 pounds of 2-row barley. We heated this up to 190 degrees for about an hour, and we allowed that to gelatinize and hydrolyze and get all those starches prepared. We cooled it down to 160 degrees. We added our 5 pounds of 2-row barley, and we were looking for that sweet spot of 155 degrees. We allowed it to sit there for 60 to 90 minutes to convert all of those starches to fermentable sugars, and everything worked out beautifully. Of course, we had challenges in the transfer, but we got everything transferred. And in the end, we wound up with about 15 gallons of mash. At this point, we checked the gravity. We knew that our gravity was a little bit low, somewhere around 1.0. My memory almost fails me every time, but it was in the 60, 65-ish area. So we had a really good conversion. We had quite a bit of fermentable sugars because we got all of those from the corn. And actually, there was some additional sugars that are resident in the 2-row barley because of the malting process. So we took advantage of that as well. But we knew we were a little bit short, and also we were lacking the last ingredient that goes into that, which is the corn syrup. And the brand name of that corn syrup is K-Row. We used K-Row corn syrup, and I used a total of, I just did the math, yeah. We used a total of 192 ounces. And we actually split that into two. Of course, we had the two fermenters, so that was 96 ounces in each one. 96 ounces per, and that brought us up to 1.086. Yeah, 1.086. Close enough. All right, close enough. So we had these two fermenters at 1.086. We adjusted the pH. Remember, we talked about that. You adjust the pH just prior to pitching your yeast, and then you leave it alone. All right. There was no need for any yeast nutrients because of the nutrients that are resident in your two-row barley and your corn. It worked out to be it works out to be almost perfect. We had the pH adjusted, we had pitched the yeast, and then we set the fermenters aside and allowed them to go. Within about 2 hours, we had two violent bubblers that were just bubbling away and fermenting. Now, the end of this process, in order for your Saddleman'S cut to turn out the way you desire, to be a nice, smooth, bourbonish whiskey style of a spirit, all you have to do is the following. Run your still, run it judiciously the way you know how to run it. Take your final product, and you can either filter or not filter. It's totally up to you. But once you get your final product, cut it down to a drinkable level. The industry standard's about 80 proof. All right, and place this in jars. And once you get it in a jar, or a barrel, or a mason jug, or whatever you want to put it in, it's totally up to you, okay? And then we use glycerin. Use a vegetable-based glycerin, which is a whole lot better than the animal-based glycerin. Use a vegetable-based glycerin at a dosage of about 2 ounces per gallon to suit your own palate, and that presents a texture and a flavor profile and takes that bite off the back of your tongue that moonshine tends to have after a straight run, because it's a pretty high proof. After the glycerin, this gets so easy. Medium toasted oak chips. Medium toasted oak chips. They come in light, medium, and dark. Dark toasted oak chips have more of a earthy, woodsy, more of an astringent flavor profile that they impart. Your light toasted oak chips, it takes a lot longer to extract the flavors that you're looking for out of the oak itself, and of course the flavor or the color profile is going to be a whole lot lighter. We found that the medium toasted oak chips are, in my opinion, the way to go, but it's totally up to you. And we do that at a rate of 2 ounces. Yeah, 2 ounces, and that's 2 weight ounces per gallon. You could throw in a few more if you want to try to speed the process up, or a few less if you got a long time to wait. And you just introduce those in here and then put the cap on it. Now, I know that every time you walk by, you're going to want to pick it up and shake it. And that's perfectly okay. I mean, you just can't help it. You know, you walk into the room and you're looking at it and you're watching this color change and you're watching all this stuff, and you're watching these oak chips float down, and then some of them start to rise back up. You're watching all this take place, and you can't help it. You're not going to hurt it. Please pick it up and shake it. Shake it once a day if that's what makes you happy. But give it about 3 weeks, and you'll wind up with a beautiful Saddleman'S cut bottle of bourbon whiskey-ish style of a spirit that I'm sure you'll enjoy. So that is the entire Saddleman'S cut process, the recipe itself and the process we used. We were constrained to our environment because of what Kevin and Andreas had available, so that's why we used this particular method. There are many different methods for the cooking, so it's totally up to you. And again, just remember, technique is up to you. The principles are all the same. Don't violate the principles, but use your own techniques. A couple of comments here at this point is that, yes, it's totally up to you. I mean, you can use wheat, you can use rye, whatever flavor profile you're looking for to try to derive from that. You use 6-row barley. It really doesn't matter at that point. But remember, now you are creating your own version or your own style of whatever you want to call it, and you may wind up with something that's really, really unique. My only comment at this point, my only advice at this point is that for any really, really good recipe, is the simpler the recipe, the easier it is to reproduce and have predictable results. Most distilleries have 3 primary ingredients or less in most of their critically acclaimed spirits. The simpler you keep it, the better off you're going to be. You can replace anything. You can substitute anything you like. You already know the science behind this. You already know the data points that you're trying to achieve. So make whatever it is you like to make. And last but not least, I use medium toasted oak chips. I find that for me, that is the best, in my opinion. That satisfies my palate, my view of what I'm looking for the best. You can use the light, you can use the dark. And yes, and before you even ask, look, I don't care if you use apple, maple, cherry. All of that is what we call superfluous. It really doesn't matter to me. I just know that the industry standard is American or French white oak, and that's it. So if you use any of those other woods, remember you're changing something, so don't expect the same results. Can't say that any better than that. We had a great time doing this, and that stuff is fermenting away. And last but not least, all we have to do is go through the clarification process, which is relatively simple, straightforward. You can allow gravity to do it, or you can use chemicals, and then run it through our still. There you have it. Saddleman'S cut, start to finish. And I apologize for this, but again, call it buffoonery. We failed to record our process.